I always refer to war as the last great unsolved public health crisis because we've got some incredible abilities to control disease in ways that our ancestors couldn't have dreamed of. Now, it doesn't mean that there aren't wahoos like RFK Jr. trying to tell people that somehow vaccines are bad for them when, of course, we don't walk around with the same rates of polio or mumps or other extremely dangerous, serious vaccine preventable diseases because of how effective vaccines have been. And yet, when it comes to our conflicts, we can't seem to exercise the technology of diplomacy in ways that keep us from fighting wars that devastate human bodies. Of course, it's the direct loss of people who die in war because of direct violence, but it's also the displacement. It's also the destruction of infrastructure that keeps us from drinking water that's been soiled, that allows us to eat healthy, clean food.
Welcome back to War is Stupid, an anti-war podcast about war. When I launched this podcast a year ago, I never imagined talking to a candidate for the United States Senate, not only because the podcast is called War is Stupid, an anti-war podcast about war, and that is historically a third rail in American politics, but also because I'm here in my bedroom in Brooklyn. But I got to sit down with Dr. Abdul El-Sayed, which speaks to both how stupid war has gotten and the campaign he's running. Dr. Abdul El-Sayed is an American physician, former public health professor, and government official who served from 2023 to 2025 as the director of the Department of Health, Human Services, and Veteran Services for Wayne County, Michigan, and he is a current candidate for United States Senate in Michigan. We had a great talk. Enjoy. Thank you, Dr. Abdul El-Sayed, for joining War is Stupid, an anti-war podcast about war. Before we get to the heavy stuff, congratulations to you in the state of Michigan on men's March Madness and the Pistons clinching the Eastern Conference.
Thank you. Big wins for all Michiganders these last week. We're hoping for more big wins in August and November.
Yes, it seems like a very exciting time to be a Michigander. And I bring up sports because that is a healthy outlet for tribalism and aggression, unlike war. We are recording this at 10 a.m. on Monday, April 13th, and the U.S. just began a naval blockade of Iran. Is the world a better and safer place now?
No, and it has not been a better and safer place since we entered into this disastrous conflagration 6-7 weeks ago now. And at the end of the day, none of the forces driving this have gotten us any of the aims because, of course, our country had no real war aims going into this. The one country that did have war aims was Israel. And among their war aims is it seems to be the annexation of southern Lebanon. So when we look at all of this, we look at the impact it's had on the price of gas, on global energy supply, and most importantly, on the lives of real people who have fought and or died in this, including many service members from the United States. You have to ask yourself, what was the point of all of this? What is the point of spending so much of our time and our treasure and our lives fighting wars that we don't need when we could be using that same money here at home to provide kids good schools and healthcare, the things that we actually need and deserve in our lives?
And what would you do differently if elected? How does it look in the Senate?
Well, number one, I think every single right-minded senator should be throwing as much sand in the gears as they possibly can. The U.S. Senate is unique insofar as you have the capacity, yes, to vote on and sponsor legislation, but also to confirm nominees both to the judiciary and to the executive branch. And there is a real pain point for this administration. So if they're going to waste our money fighting wars in our name, then they ought to get all of their business held up. The other thing I would tell you I would definitely not do is even entertain the idea of voting to fund a war that has no aims and makes no sense, is illegal and unjustifiable. But too often you see folks who should be fully and 100% with their full chest saying how much they oppose the war, talking about why they might actually vote to fund it in a supplemental. And we got to stop playing these games. Either it's illegal and unjustifiable and you would not vote to fund it, or you think it's perfectly fine and you would vote to fund it, but it's not halfway. You can't keep playing procedural games when it comes to people's lives and livelihoods and more.
What would a foreign policy that prioritizes the sanctity of human life over the profits of weapons manufacturers look like? Like, it, wh-
Blue sky.
it yeah.
So, Orly, I'll tell you this. I'm a bit of a student of history, and I know enough about World War II to know that people who lived through it never wanted to see anything like that ever again. They never wanted to see the likes of a Hitler terrorize and destroy Jewish people and people all over Europe, trying to turn all of Europe into empire. And so what they did is they sat down together and they imagined a global entity and a set of global rules, what we call the rules-based international order. They built things like the UN, the WHO, the International Court of Justice, the International Criminal Court, and they devised a plan by which the countries of the world would come together to make sure that nothing like that ever happened again. And as history went on, unfortunately, we have too often, rather than being the first among equals to enforce the rules of the rules-based international order, we have often been the first to break the rules of the rules-based international order when it seems to be in our short-term interest. So to me, what I would like to see is a doubling down on those rules, the notion that those rules apply to everyone, that you can't just break those rules simply because you're stronger and nobody can enforce it. It would mean that when we act, we don't act alone, that there is global consensus built around protecting folks when, in fact, anyone tries to break those rules. And here's the problem with it, where we've been an enforcer of those rules in situations like the Balkans in the 90s or even in Ukraine now, I think we make good decisions operating with our allies to stop folks who would do great harm to other people. And where we have chosen to break those rules, like in Vietnam or in Iraq or Afghanistan or in Israel or now in Iran, just 2 months ago, I know that's like off the front pages now, in Venezuela, we make terrible decisions. And it turns out that when we break those rules, other people watch, right? You think about a Vladimir Putin watching the war in Iraq and saying, well, if they can do that, then I can get away with trying to steal the territory of my neighbor. You think about what Xi Jinping is watching. And so I think we ought to go back to those rules. We ought to make sure we're enforcing them. We've ought to actually give global enforcement some teeth, and we've got to commit to being the first among equals in enforcing the rules of the rules-based international order.
Thank you. And you mentioned the World Health Organization, and you speak out against war and genocide not only as a politician but also as a doctor, as a physician. So what does armed conflict do to the human body?
I always refer to war as the last great unsolved public health crisis because we've got some incredible abilities to control disease in ways that our ancestors couldn't have dreamed of. Now, it doesn't mean that there aren't wahoos like RFK Jr. trying to tell people that somehow vaccines are bad for them when, of course, we don't walk around with the same rates of polio or mumps or other extremely dangerous, serious vaccine preventable diseases because of how effective vaccines have been. And yet, when it comes to our conflicts, we can't seem to exercise the technology of diplomacy in ways that keep us from fighting wars that devastate human bodies. Of course, it's the direct loss of people who die in war because of direct violence, but it's also the displacement. It's also the destruction of infrastructure that keeps us from drinking water that's been soiled, that allows us to eat healthy, clean food. And when you violate that, people live in circumstances that are devastated. It creates the breeding ground for so many other diseases, whether they are mental illnesses like PTSD or depression or anxiety, or of course, there are physical illnesses like onsets of vaccine preventable diseases because of decimated waterways and food environments. So war to me is the root of a whole set of preventable illnesses that we ought to be able to take on. And I come at all of these questions, whether it's the fight for Medicare for all here at home or the fight against dumbass wars like the one in Iran, from my training as a physician. What is best to empower people to thrive, to live their healthiest, best, most fulfilling kinds of lives? And war is exactly the opposite of that. And then you ask yourself, for what reason? Who wins in war? Well, it's the people who make weapons that we go and drop on other people, or it's warmongers who believe in territorial expansion based on a myth they told themselves about who they were and where they stood in history. None of this is justified. All of us want to live our best, healthiest, longest, most fulfilling lives. And it requires us to be able to double down on diplomacy and to see one another as fellows in humanity, rather than as adversaries on some kind of mythical battlefield.
And what is the connection between money and politics and the forever war? Why does this keep happening?
Right now, our system is corrupted by the wealth that can be spent to beget more wealth. So if you are a weapons manufacturer, or you are an oil and gas company, or you are someone who's dead set on tying our foreign policy interests to those of a foreign government, you can spend tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars in electioneering and attack ads, in claims that have nothing to do with your central goal, to try and influence our political system. I'm running in Michigan for US Senate. There are going to be tens of millions of dollars spent against me because of my anti-genocide, my anti-war stances. They're not going to come at me because I'm anti-war, because of course they know that the broad swath of the American public and the Michigan voters agree with me on that. They're going to come at me in smears and attack ads, and they're going to spend tens of millions of dollars to try and shift public opinion simply because I stand up against war. Most of that spending is going to be coming from AIPAC, a MAGA billionaire-backed special interest group that wants us to believe that our most important foreign policy goal is about justifying and backstopping the interests of leadership in Israel. And I stand forthrightly against that, because I've watched as Israel has committed apartheid, committed genocide, and now taking us into war. We're watching as our own tax dollars are being used for the goal of territorial expansion on their behalf, while it's spiking our gas prices and sending us into an energy catastrophe. This isn't in the best interest of anybody in the United States, but it may be in the best interest of Benjamin Netanyahu and his government. And that's why we're at war right now.
And it is not in the best interest of Jewish people. I started this podcast precisely to fight against the Jews being used as the face of war. I've said it before, and I'll say it again. Raytheon is not my cousin. I don't want to. I'm not here to empower and protect Raytheon. Um, yeah,
And Orly, if I can comment on that, I really appreciate
please.
you saying that, because there is this effort consistently to expand the definition of anti-Semitism to include a country. And I love and revere Judaism and the Jewish people. I was so blessed to grow up in a community where about 40% of the kids I went to high school with were Jewish. I learned so much about Jewish culture and Jewish history and Jewish resistance against the exact same forces that we're seeing deployed to take us to war right now. The attempt to tie Jews and Judaism, whether in America or even in Israel, to the interests of the Jewish government, I think is such a dangerous thing. And I say that as someone who also knows what it's like to be discriminated against for praying a little bit differently. being discriminated against because of my ethnic background. And I would never want anybody to say or to assume what I believe because of the interests of the government of Egypt, where my family immigrated from, or the interests of the government of Saudi Arabia, where Mecca and Medina sit. I stand forthrightly against our funding for the Egyptian military and the Saudi military as forthrightly as I stand against our funding for the Israeli military. Because at the end of the day, the same reason I love Judaism and the Jewish people is the reason I oppose genocide and wars, because I love people. And I want all people to have equal opportunities to thrive, regardless of who they are, how they pray, where they grow up, and what circumstances they live in. And I think it's just critical for us to constantly be pushing our beliefs and our principles independent of an effort that people make to try and say that your attempt to oppose a genocide or a war has something to do with people they say you hate rather than who you love, which is all people.
Yes, to paraphrase my rabbi, Larry David, I hate people individually, but I love mankind. And
That's well said.
something I think about a lot is how anti-Semitism and Islamophobia have the same dad, which is white Christian nationalism. I'm scared of Tucker Carlson, man. I'm really scared. What could we do to better unite and fight against this white supremacy? Because it's scary.
It is. And I think our job is to constantly say what we're for and what we're about. No one group gets a monopoly on power. No one group gets a monopoly on pain. And our responsibility is to make sure that everybody's pain is taken seriously in the same way, and that we build a world where we can come together to ease all of our pain. I got two little girls at home, and when I look those little girls in the eye, I know what I feel. And I know that everybody who's got children or got loved ones, we all feel the same things. That is the least common denominator of being human. And I think it is critical for us to tap into that thing, to be asking, how do we then lock arms with each other around building the kind of world where nobody thinks that they can declare war on other people because they look different or pray different? That is the question I think should drive all of us. And I think we've got to unite around that as people who recognize the responsibility to invest in people.
If you don't take corporate PAC money, where do you get your morals and values from?
My grandmother, smartest, wisest person I ever met in my whole life, never got to go to school. She was the ninth of 14. She herself raised 6 kids of 8 to whom she gave birth to, having died before their first birthday. And I often think to myself, what would my grandmother be proud of? This is somebody who never stepped foot in an institution, never had her beliefs and morals corrupted by what institutions tell you you're supposed to believe. So I try to always tap in to her. And then more importantly, you know, I get to take that out to people in the state of Michigan who tell me that they just want to be able to breathe clean air and drink clean water. They want to be able to go outside and engage with one another. They want to work a dignified job. They want to be able to afford the basic means of a dignified life. They want to be able to see a doctor when they get sick. And they're good people. And right now they're having wars and terrible things done with their tax dollars in their name. So my job is to always remember what they want and try to use the government to be able to achieve those things rather than the aims of a Donald Trump or a Raytheon or an AIPAC.
You recently attended a Passover Seder at Congregation Tehillah in Ferndale. What was your favorite part? Do you have a favorite song? I know it's really long, so there's a lot to choose from.
Yeah, there were a lot of parts of it that were so meaningful. I just really appreciated the aspect of just the communal nature of all of it. The telling of the story of the 4 children, and especially at Tehillah, there is a reinterpretation of those 4 children that I thought was really quite meaningful in the ways that they talk about, the quote unquote troublesome child, but as also thinking about that as the lack of access to information and what that can do. So I found it so meaningful. I was so grateful to be welcomed in. And I'm always just so appreciative when I have the opportunity to be embraced by my Jewish sisters and brothers.
What has surprised you the most about whole journey on the campaign trail?
The disconnect between who Washington, D.C. thinks Michiganders are and who the media think Michiganders are and who Michiganders really are. Michigan is home to, I think, the best people in the world, like just really, really good people who want to be able to do good for themselves, their families, their loved ones, their communities. And in the DC telling of things, in the media telling of things, there's these like middle voters. They're just moderate, as if everybody's spending all day thinking about where they stand on a political spectrum. That's just like not how the world works. And it turns out that too many of these folks are just locked out of their politics and they don't believe that our political system can actually deliver the things that they deserve: a good, dignified job, good schools for their kids, good health care when they need it. And when you show up and you're willing to look them in the eye in their communities, in their VFW halls, in their living rooms, in their workplaces, they remind you just the goodness in people and that none of this is really that complicated, right? It's just really not that hard. We want the basic things. We want to experience them together, and that we need a politics that gets to deliver that.
And what does that politics look like?
To me, it's a politics where we constantly center our kids. We ask ourselves, what decisions would we be making if we took seriously the idea that the most hallowed and holy thing is the future that a kid gets to watch play out in front of them? It would mean that instead of fighting wars, we would be thinking about investing in schools. It means that we would take that transition of life from a pregnant mom to a baby as being one of the holiest, most important things. We would be investing so much more in that if anyone got sick, they would get the health care that they needed, that we would not corrupt and pollute our air and water because of the interests of a few trillion-dollar corporations, where we recognize that the way that we interact with each other has to be eye to eye rather than screen to screen. And it's one where every person got equal access to the say in their government and got to really choose rather than having a few billionaires and corporations decide who we all get to vote for. And it would be one of joy, right? Where you look at the future in front of you and say that future is going to be better even than today, which was a glorious day, which was been better than yesterday. And I think we're so far away from that right now, but we got to tap into that thing and we got to believe in it. And I'll just tell you that, like, so long as we have a democracy, we have agency here, even as these people are trying to take it away from us. So we've got to use the agency we have to try and build the future we deserve.
Yeah, we're also today is I shout out to the people of Hungary who are presumably incredibly hungover. You can, no matter how far down a certain path you go, you can always take the power back.
That's right. And like, that's incredible. I mean, for folks who've studied the Hungarian experience, they had thought that, like, because of the power that Viktor Orban and his party had over everything from the press to the mechanisms of government, that, Hungary wasn't a democracy anymore. And look what they did, right? They were able to defeat him even despite the odds because people put themselves into their politics. And that's what this is about. That's what our campaign is trying to do. And that's the work that we all have to commit to as folks who believe in our country.
Tell me more about Michigan. I'm a coastal elite here in Mamdani's, New York, which I love, and it's been a while. I used to go to dance competitions in Detroit, and we'd
All
stop
right.
at, which is awesome. And the Somerset Collection Mall in Troy, if I recall correctly, is the most glamorous, beautiful mall, or at least it was when I was in middle school. But yeah, what makes Michigan special? And when should I come down? I'm not afraid of winter.
All right. Well, I would recommend basically any time between mid-April and mid-November. Michigan is gorgeous. Michigan is incredible. We both have a combination of the best, most earnest, and grittiest people, and just a beautiful, beautiful state. I mean, we have these incredible Great Lakes that look like oceans. We've got, we're peninsulas, two peninsulas in Michigan. We don't quite have mountains, but we've got very large sand dunes. And I think we've got the best summer in the whole country. And then the people, right? Just a combination of people, Black folk who came up during the Great Migration. You've got folks who hail from all over the world, large Finn and Scottish communities who settled, and incredible Native communities, especially up in the Sioux. You've got folks who've come from the Middle East and come from Asia. All of us building stuff, right? Michigan is our history is the history of the country. We put the world on wheels. We built the arsenal of democracy that helped to defeat Hitler in World War II. That was supposed to be the war to end wars. We've been able to build this combination of building and growing. The second biggest economic output of our state is agriculture. We grow the best berries in the country, our blueberries and our cherries. And our produce generally is incredible. Strawberry season is like the best, and it is the kind of place where a lot of folks have been able to come together and build something that's greater than the sum of its parts. Our pizza is the best pizza. Our sports teams are the
Wow.
best
Oh,
sports teams. I welcome you to come, and I particularly welcome you to come if you're interested. Come in July. We're going to be putting on quite a show here, so it'll be a lot of fun. And yes, I meant what I said about our pizza. Detroit style pizza is the best.
what is Detroit style pizza?
So it's technically Sicilian square. And what's cool about it is the auto workers used to take the casts, and then they realized that they could make incredible pizza out of the casts that they had in their factories. And so what distinguishes Detroit style is it's a thicker dough. It's not the pizza casserole that they serve out of Chicago. It is a thicker dough, and then you put cheese all the way to the edge, and you actually put the sauce on top. And so you get this incredible caramelized cheese all the way to the edge of the pizza. And then you've got this, it's both crispy because it basically fries in the cast and is also gooey. And then you've got the caramelized cheese, you've got the sauce on the top. It is phenomenal. If for folks in New York where I would go, there's a pretty good Detroit style place called Emily. And if you're interested, I actually know they have one in Brooklyn. So Emily or Emmy Squared, which is the sort of the smaller version of Emily Pizza. So I'd recommend that.
Are those expats? It's authentic?
I mean, we export things in Detroit, so yes, it is
Yes.
pretty authentic. And then if you've got a Jets is also Detroit style pizza.
Amazing. So, you mentioned Michigan being home to people from all over the world. S- So, how are foreign conflicts felt in at home? To quote another doctor, the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, "Justice everywhere, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere," which I think was made incredibly clear at the synagogue attack. That just shows how injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere, and how war doesn't make us safer anywhere.
Yeah, it was a terrible attack, and people are grieving all over our state. That attack on Temple Israel was just such a scary moment. I grew up 15 minutes away from Temple Israel. Many of my classmates studied or went to shul at the temple, and just dastardly anti-Semitic attack. We're in a situation right now where folks across the state are watching with bated breath this war, whether you're from the Persian community or, we have a very large Lebanese community, many of whom are from the South, who have just lost loved ones or ancestral homes. And folks are devastated because none of this should have happened. And the idea that our tax dollars are being used, whether indirect to drop these bombs or in the way that we subsidize Israel's military to drop bombs, the idea that your tax dollars are being used to kill your family members is something that nobody should have to suffer, and that's the current circumstance of a lot of people in Michigan right now.
Thank you. I'm sorry to get to that after pizza. I'm sure the nature of politics, not the strangest transition. Hopefully, you've experienced. You get all sorts of questions. What has been the most memorable question you've gotten at town halls? Anything really
Hmm.
stood out, whether or not it's about pizza?
You know, my favorite questions are the ones I get from young people. There is this nihilism right now, which I totally understand. I mean, if you're just becoming an adult, chances are you were born in, you know, 2006, 2008, that period. You were born into the Great Recession. You were born into two wars. You were born into the era of the internet. Donald Trump came down that hideous escalator when you were a child. You're watching as things have felt worse and often gotten worse, unless you're one of the 1% richest people who's been able to use your wealth to extract from everyone else. Um, but there is a hope there. There is a belief there in a future that is better, that's more just. And when folks see themselves in this campaign and ask, how can I be a part of something? How should I be preparing to be able to make the world a better place for myself and my generation and my kids' generation? Those to me are the most heartwarming. And they always ask the best questions because they surface the kind of tension between how tough things are and feel like they're getting and how good they really ought to be.
And so what gives you hope? I ask every guest because I'm in desperate search of it.
Two things. Number one, I got two little girls at home, and those little girls could care less about what's happening in the broader world abroad. They're they're just good. They want good for everyone around them, and I get to see them every day when I can, when I'm at home, and they remind me what we're all working for. And then I get to meet really great people up and down my state. I mean, if you interact with politics and the sum total of your interaction is scrolling through, you name your social media poison, it feels like a very dire place. But when you actually get to interact with real people in real places and you hear what they care about and what they want and what they pine for, and you hear their willingness to go out and work for that thing, it gives you a lot of hope. So I'm so grateful that I get to interact with politics for the most part in rooms with real people who want really good things for each other. And that gives me endless hope and it fuels the work that this campaign does.
And presumably with good pizza.
And great pizza. We always have great pizza. It's just par for the course.
Thank you so much. So where can people find you? How can people join the movements?
I hope that folks will check us out. Follow me on socials. I'm the only Abdul for Senate anywhere, but I'm at Abdul El-Sayed, Elsayed. And then go to our website, abdulforsenate.com. Sign up to volunteer if you can. Sign up to chip us off $5 or $10. I don't take money from corporations. I'm the only person, Democrat or Republican, in my race who never has and never will. So we do rely on good folks like you. So if you can be generous with us, I really appreciate it. And then tell your friends, right? Reach out to folks, share this interview. You got an amazing platform here. I'm so grateful that you were willing to share it with us. And I'm looking forward to hopefully seeing you in Michigan and sharing some good pizza with you.
Thank you so much. And yeah, see you in the Eastern Conference final.
Look forward to that. Go Pistons.
Thank you for listening and or watching War is Stupid, an anti-war podcast about war. Please subscribe, rate and review, tell your dads. We'll see you next time.